Hey there, everybody. Brad Geiger here with another episode of Webcomics Confidential. And today we're going to talk about webcomic collectives. And we all have seen those over the years. This came in as the result of a question brought up by a webcomics.com member. And it reads like this. I've been reading webcomics since the early 2000s, and many of the webcomics that I read over the years were members of webcomics communities. Keen Spot and Keen Space, that's going back. Blank Label Comics, Half Pixel, and a few others. I always thought that being part of a community would be beneficial because of strength in numbers, cross-promotion, and having people to lean on when you need help. I was never part of one, so I don't have any experience or knowledge to draw on for this question, but I was wondering, do you think that webcomics communities are a thing of the past, or could they still be a good thing? Or is this a case-by-case situation? It would seem to me that in an era of social connectivity, that maybe it's unnecessary, but again, I have no foundation to draw upon for this subject. So, thank you for a fantastic question. This has a lot of great parts to it. There's a lot to unpack here, and it's a great topic to talk about right now because we are very much, in my opinion, kind of in an everything old is new again kind of thing. For example, I made the point not too long ago that the idea of a Patreon content exchange is not that different than what we did back in the early 2000s, and we called it a web ring, where you would put your comic into an HTML code that would bring your link up at the bottom of someone else's page, and then someone else's page would come up as a link at the bottom of your page, and it formed an entire ring that somebody could navigate all the way through from page to page, all of the members, if they wanted to do that. And it was really, a web ring was kind of the very first kind of webcomics community that was formed. And I'm making the argument that Patreon content exchanges are not that different. In other words, when you take some of your exclusive content and you give it to someone else to use it as their exclusive content, thereby exposing your work to their backers, and that is obviously reciprocated back. Not that different from a web ring. It's a very old idea, but with everything that's going on now, it's become kind of a new idea. And so when I first saw this question, I kind of challenged myself, well, is this one of those everything old is new again things? I was a member of every one of the groups that you mentioned there in your letter, and I can tell you from experience that every group that I joined had a lot of strengths. There was a lot of good that came from being part of those communities, part of those groups. And there was a good deal of bad that was involved with them. If that wasn't the case, I would still be involved with them. That doesn't mean that the people were bad. It doesn't mean that I'm angry at any of those people or they did bad things. It was more a case of I could simply do better independently. And at some point, I think everyone gets to that point where they're just better off making decisions strictly for their own business, and being part of a group fetters that. It holds you back. It makes you slower. And in some cases, it ends up you make decisions that you didn't want to make because you might have been overruled by a certain number of people in that community. So there's a number of kind of bad things that come up, and a number of good things. There's lots of good parts about being in a webcomics community, and what you have to do is balance that out, weigh that out, and decide for yourself, does the good outweigh the bad? So in that spirit, let's talk about some of the group dynamics that happens when you join one of these groups. Number one, this is the big one, and this is what drove me out of a good number of the collaborations, or the, I guess collaboration is kind of the wrong word there. The webcomics community, the groups that I was in. Number one, and this is true of any group of people, any time you gather 3 or 4 people and get them trying to do the same thing, this is going to happen universally. And that is, you've got some people who are doers and you've got some people who are users. The doers are the active members. They go out there and they make things happen. They get things done. If there are ad networks to attach to all of the pages, they go out and make those contacts. If there's a convention coming up, they are the ones that are putting the down payment down and are filling out the paperwork and so on and so forth. The users in the group are the people that sit back and watch this happen very happily and are happy to float right along and show up at the convention when it's time for them to show up, and more than happy to criticize if things haven't been done to their liking. But very seldom do they get active and actually become a doer. Now, if you're a user, this is great. This is fantastic. This is a wonderful way to go through life. If you're a doer, you get very quickly disappointed, disenfranchised, and frustrated over the fact that you keep doing and these people keep floating. And you realize very quickly that it's in your best interest to just do for yourself. Okay? And again, this isn't that users are bad people. This isn't that they're lazy or, there's no malice intended. In some cases, they may not be able to. They may not feel the need to. They might feel that if they did get more involved, they'd be stepping on someone's toes. There might be 100 reasons that a user is a user. That doesn't make any difference if you're a doer. All you know is, I'm doing all the work and this guy's floating. And that's going to get under your skin. Very, if not quickly, it will over a length of time. You will soon get tired of being all the doer stuff, or doing all the doing, as it were, and hearing the users criticize it. So that's the first thing to keep in mind. If you're a doer, this is going to grate on you very soon. And it goes beyond conventions and stuff like that. If there's anything going on in this community, if it's anything beyond a simple link exchange, there are things that need to get done. Oh, and by the way, if it's a simple link exchange, I'm going to argue it's not worth joining in the first place. You can outdo that with social media any day of the week, and there's going to be a certain amount of negative that comes with that, and that has to do with, is this web ring type of idea, is it appropriate for your group? Who's letting the other people into the group? Do they reflect well on you? There's negative that comes with that as well. And I'm going to argue right off the bat, if this is nothing more than an exchange of links, it's not even worth being part of because the negatives are very quickly going to outweigh the positives, in my opinion. Beyond the doers and the users, here's a little problem that comes up quite often. And that is this. You have a group of cartoonists that are all pooling their resources. By nature, some of them will have more that they bring to the table, and some of them will have less. Now, if one of the main reasons that you're joining this collective is to pool traffic and page views, then obviously there's going to be one person in this collective that has a greater number of page views than the others. The question that needs to be addressed at this point is, what's in it for that person? Or is that person being exploited? Because if that person has the largest traffic, you can very quickly see that they're not getting as much benefit from pooling the readers as the small fish in the pond, right? I have a lot more to gain from somebody with a huge traffic joining my collective because I get to now surf off of their wake as they chug down the lake, right? I get to surf off of their wake and get all that flyby traffic that I'm going to amass, but I'm really not doing anything to make it worthwhile to the large fish. The large fish is quickly going to figure this out if they haven't already, and sooner or later they're going to leave. If again you're running a collective that feeds off of cross promotion and shared traffic, losing that big fish is going to be a huge blow to what you've been doing. Okay, and they will figure, if they haven't figured it out already, they will figure it out. I don't need this collective unless that collective, of course, is providing something else that somehow that big fish needs. All right. If there's some kind of symbiosis there that's actually benefit for both parties, then that's certainly doesn't become a negative. But in many cases, in many of the collectives that you see out there, there's somebody in that collective that just is not benefiting the same as the other members. And if they're not getting something in return, they're going to figure it out sooner or later and say, this isn't worth it. Anytime here's another big one. Anytime you have to be very, very careful who you let in the group. And you have to make those decisions based on factors other than the traffic or, what kind of cross promotion or community sharing, reader sharing type of things that this comic can offer to the group. You have to keep in mind that this is a collection of personalities as well. If you're like every other group of web cartoonists out there, one of the central reasons that you're also doing this is that you can have a private forum somewhere that you guys can share ideas without having it out in the open. You can speak openly and honestly about things that are going on. That kind of camaraderie and that kind of support network is a great part of being part of a collective. Having someplace where you can go, where you can just vent, or you can get honest opinions from people who you value and trust as fellow creators. That was a part of being part of a collective that I always really liked. That was a great thing. Here's the problem with that. You have to be very, very careful who you allow into that collective because you have a group of personalities there. And all it takes is one. I'm telling you, this sounds like I'm exaggerating, but it's absolutely the truth. All it takes is one person to come in and upset the entire apple cart, throw everything into disarray. It is, and all it takes is sometimes. It's certainly not as part of any collective that I have ever been in, but I have heard stories. In at least one case, it wasn't even the creator, but the creator's wife that ended up becoming an unintentional member of that community and threw things completely upside down. Never as a part of a community that I was particularly involved in. But I know that it's happened, okay? So you have to be ultra careful about who you let into the group, and you have to let them in. It's very difficult. So you see somebody with a lot of traffic, and it's like, I want that person to be part of my collective. He or she brings a ton of traffic. Well, but their personality might be horrible, right? They might come in and be absolutely a toxic part of that group and throw things into disarray. Or you might have, on the other hand, you might have a super sweet person, absolutely a charming beyond belief, wonderful, has tremendous value as a human being, but the traffic just isn't there. Now, and let's also sweeten this up a little bit. This person is going to be more of a user than a doer. Do you let that person in? They might be the sweetest person in the world, but they don't bring anything to the other side of the equation, the pragmatic side. What does adding this comic to your collective do for the collective? If you're, and again, now back in the day, I've argued in the past that we're moving away from an ad-supported business model. One of the strengths of a collective is that it pooled resources for advertisers. You could show ad networks, instead of your comic and your traffic, you could get better advertising deals by pooling all of your traffic and then saying, oh no, it's not a site with 100,000 page views a day. It's a group of sites that you're dealing with. We're all going to run the same ads, and it'll be 1 million page views a day or whatever. That was a real strength of the collective model. Are we ready to go back to that? I don't know. There's a lot of hidden hiccups that are involved with that. Not the least of which is splitting up the money. All right. What's going to inevitably happen is you're going to have one big fish that does all the heavy lifting for page views and web traffic, and that person is going to rightfully want the biggest share of the income. Two things happen there after you've reached that point. Number one, that big fish is going to realize he doesn't need the little fish and can get a much better ad deal going on his own or going on her own, and they're going to split as soon as money gets involved because they're like, I don't need this. And then that's going to completely destroy the page views that you were offering to that ad network. And they're going to slowly choke you out and give you worse and worse ads over time. And the other thing is this person who is the big fish in your collective is not going to appreciate that cut, even if you make it a favorable cut. Even if you say, okay, you add 50% of our total traffic, so you're going to get 50% of our revenue. Well, the person that is doing all that accounting should get paid, or is going to need to get paid, because they're not going to want to do that month after month after month without getting some kind of money for their efforts. So you're going to have to take a little bit of that money, instead of giving that big fish their full percentage. A cut has to come from the big fish's percentage as well. Kick it back to whomever is doing that accounting, figuring out, okay, who had what traffic, how do we divide this all up? And there's also going to have to be a tax hit that happens in there somewhere. That money is all earned income, and it's coming into somebody's account. All right? Now, you've got to set that up correctly with your taxes, or else somebody's going to get burned somewhere down the road. You just can't take that money and split it up and say everything's fine. Once you cross the $500 mark of whoever's accepting those funds, pays that out to someone, once those payouts amass over $500, you've got to start getting W-2s involved, 1099s, all that kind of stuff. And that gets very complicated. Now you're talking about a much higher level of bookkeeping, and someone's going to need to get paid to do that. Someone in the collective is just going to make money by figuring out who gets what money. Okay? And by the way, that's going to be the first thing that drives that big fish out, because they're like, hey, you're taking cuts just so you can figure out what the cuts are. I can do this on my own. And they split. It's the first thing that's going to happen. All right? And there's no getting around it without leaving yourself open for some real difficult tax hurdles down the road. So it's not as easy as we'll just pool all of our resources and split the money based on a proportion of the traffic. It's not as easy as that. Someone's got to, at the very least, someone's got to figure all that stuff out. And if you're doing it right, someone's got to take the tax hit. Oh, and by the way, that tax hit should come out of the central funds. So now, if you made $100 last month, you're going to want to put away 20 or 30 of that into a tax fund so that when it comes time for you to pay your taxes on that money, you can. Now you take the rest of that and you split it up, and number one, huge amount of headache. It's a huge bookkeeping headache for someone. And number two, pretty soon, if the large traffic getter in your group is going to figure out, and rightly so, they can do this on themselves. They don't need you. All right? So that's another very, very important thing. You have to decide who joins your group, what they bring to the table, whether that's worth it, are they a doer or a user, and it sounds like I'm really down on collectives. And I'll be honest with you, there's a reason I don't belong to a collective any longer. And that is because for me, there was not enough positives. I'm not going to say the negatives outweighed the positives, because like when it came down to like Half Pixel, that was, and by the way, notice, at least from my own experience, this started out on Keen Space. There were hundreds of members of Keen Space. That was not great. That was not very beneficial. I moved up to Keen Spot. There were dozens of members of Keen Spot. That was also not super beneficial. I mean, it was for the time. At that time, I couldn't have run ads on my own site to save my life. And being able to get a check from Keen Spot was a fantastic thing for where I was at that point. Once I figured out I could do it myself and how to do it myself, I didn't need a collective. And here's the dirty secret: it wasn't that hard to figure out. I could have done it in a weekend if I would have put my mind to it. But I went from Keen Spot to Blank Label Comics, and that was 8. That was just a handful of people, and that was great for when it was and what it was. But at some point, there was 3 or 4 of us that broke out from that and became Half Pixel, and now it's just 4 guys. There was things we wanted to do, and for a little while it was fantastic, but very shortly we all realized that we're just so much better off doing this independently. And after Half Pixel broke up, it wasn't that we stopped doing things together. We did all kinds of things together. Dave and I, Chris and I, Scott and I, and different combinations of those 4 people continued to collaborate. But it was just beneficial for us to do those collaborations instead of as one unit. It became much better for us to do them as inter-business collaborations. My business collaborating with Scott's business, for example, was how Surviving Creativity started out. We didn't need to be part of a collective for that. We just needed to make our schedules intertwine, and so on and so forth. So you don't need those collective structures in order to have collaborations. You can do all kinds of great things without being part of a collective, a webcomics collective. So, are you thinking about joining a collective? You got to go in with your eyes open and know if you're a doer or a user, and go in and realize that there's going to be a lot of negatives that go along with the positives. Here's the bottom line when it comes to webcomics collectives. You can decide that joining a collective is the right idea for you. You can decide that this is something you want to do and it's a great fit for you, and so on and so forth. That's all fantastic. Here's what you need to know, no matter what. And this is just life advice too. But here's what you need to know in joining a collective. When you join a collective, there will be a beginning, a middle, and an end, and everything comes to an end. That's one of the big talks that we all had in the Half Pixel private forum when it was just Dave, Chris, Scott, and I. We said, listen, here's something we need to talk about. This is going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. It's not going to go on forever. Nothing goes on forever. And we have to discuss the end at the beginning. We have to discuss when members leave, how that looks, what happens, who owns what the responsibilities are to that member who is leaving, what that member who is leaving can expect, what they cannot expect. We have to discuss an exit strategy. On day one, at the beginning, you have to discuss the end. What does it look like when somebody wants to leave? It went so far in keeping bad feelings out of that situation when it inevitably arose. All right? We kind of dissolved in a very friendly manner because we discussed what it would look like at the end while we were still at the beginning, in that honeymoon phase, right? When we were, oh man, we're going to do such great things. We're going to do this, we're going to do that. And by the way, just in case it sounds like I'm really down on collectives, which I guess I kind of am, but to be completely fair, there were lots of great things that came out of being in a collective, all right? Blank Label Comics, when Hurricane Katrina came up, we did the Blank Label Comics Hurricane Katrina fundraiser, and we made it so that all the money that was raised went directly to the Red Cross. There was not even a hesitation. Just the entire sum went right to the Red Cross, and immediately. I mean, it's not a situation where Hurricane Katrina needs heroes or something. It went immediately. I felt so proud about that. We did a tremendous fundraiser for that, and I forget the actual numbers, but the traffic we generated and the amount of money, because we didn't want to be in a situation where we accepted funds, we just directed people right to the Red Cross site. So we never found out exactly how much money we made, but estimated. We would say, okay, when we'd give them a clicker to click, and it'd say, I'm going to go give the Red Cross $10. I'm going to give them $100. I'm going to give them $200. I'm going to give them whatever, $5, $1, right? And we charted what clicker they clicked to go over to the Red Cross, and by charting what their intentions were, and then subtracting like 10% for people that we figured were liars, we still sent over like, God, tens of thousands of dollars, if I remember right. It was a ridiculous sum of money that just never even entered our bank account, just went right to the Red Cross. I was so proud of that. That was a great thing we did. In fact, I think on Lulu you can still find the Hurricane Katrina book that we put out, and I just hooked that up so that any money there went to a chapter of the Red Cross that had a PayPal account that I connected it to. You can still find that out there in different places. That was a fantastic thing that we did, and we did tons of stuff that was like that. That there was a lot of good that came out of a collective. Your goal, in my mind, is to realize that your participation in this collective is going to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, and you should talk about the end while you're still at the beginning. If you're in charge of a collective, or if you're thinking about building a collective, I would suggest writing a contract. Not a strict legal contract, but more or less, and this is really what a contract is anyway, a list of expectations, what you can expect, what I can expect from you. And if you line up all of those expectations, somebody's bumping on the other side of my studio. If you can line up all of those expectations so they're clearly expressed, and nobody has any surprises, what people want them to do and what they can expect other people to do, and then you can hold the members to that and show them that document and said, okay, this is what we're expecting from you and you're not delivering, so we need to talk about that. I would really strongly suggest having a contract that defines community expectations. And again, talk about the end. Here's what's going to happen when you come to an end or when this collective comes to an end. Here's what everybody can expect to happen at that point. If you do that, then you can experiment with a collective all you want, see if it's the right fit for you. I think you're going to find all the stuff that I just talked about holds water just as much today as it did 10 years ago, because this is all based on human nature stuff. This goes back through time immemorial, as they say. But listen, if you want to try it out for yourself, you think you want to do a collective, you go do that. My job is to make sure you do it with your eyes open and you know what to look for, you know what to expect, and you know how to protect yourself in the event that things go haywire. So that's my thoughts on webcomic collectives. See if you agree with me. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Hit webcomics.com, throw a little comment in there, let me know what you think. Maybe share a story from your own collective. Until then, this is Brad Geiger for Webcomics Confidential, and we'll see you next time.